Hello, Provincetown! It's good to see you. It's good to be with you. Happy 4th of July. And coming off of a great Pride, so happy Pride. A lot of gays in the room are like, oh God, I thought we were done. It's so good to be here with you. It's so good to be coming off of a wonderful Pride Month where Pete and I were able to travel the country and celebrate with so many people like you who made this opportunity possible, who built a moment and a movement in America to propel someone like my husband to the presidency. What you did by coming out, by creating safe spaces for people, by creating spaces for people to believe in themselves and believe in this country, made this moment possible for us. And I want to let you know that it is not lost on us that we were given this moment by brave people, men, women, and trans persons, especially at Stonewall, trans persons of color who propelled us to this moment, who made this moment possible. So, before I start to brag about how much I love my husband, I wanted to take a moment to thank you and thank the people who came before us for giving us this opportunity. Not a bad place to celebrate Pride, not a bad place to be here in Provincetown, in Town Hall, the place that issued the first gay marriage license after the Supreme Court decision. What a marvelous place to be. Speaking of marriage, not where I thought I would be in my first year of marriage either. But it has been a tremendous year, a remarkable year, traveling the country with Peter and getting to know people from all walks of life, people who are craving something new, who are craving change, people who are crying out for a politics that talks about them, not the horror show happening in Washington, but a politics that is real, that is based around the kitchen table. For me, growing up in northern Michigan in a small town with a working family, my mom and dad still live there and own a small business, politics was always the thing that happened to us. It was nothing that we were interested in, it was always those people far away making decisions about how our lives would go. And for many people in this room, perhaps you felt the same way I did as a gay kid growing up in rural America, that politics was the thing that told me that I was disgusting, that I didn't belong, that I was vile, I was immoral. So of course I got as far away from politics as possible. And up until the summer of 2015 when I met this cute mayor on Hinge. I had no interest in politics for my entire life. It was just the thing that made life harder. My mom is still battling cancer, and as a young kid watching my parents scrape every penny together just to afford health care, Obamacare is the thing that is keeping my mother alive. Yeah. And for many of you, maybe you were like me, that was watching a family and watching your parents or people that you love struggle and wondering, why is politics making life so hard? Why does it seem like politics is pushing me away, pushing my family away, and telling us we're the problem? Fast forward to 2015 when I met this cute mayor and decided to go on a date with him. And I still had some preconceived notions about who politicians were and what politics was like. But I really needed to see those beautiful blue eyes in person, so I drove over to South Bend. And we had a marvelous first date. Shared a pint at our local Irish pub, walked through downtown, saw a baseball game, and the Peter that I fell in love with that night is the Peter that I have seen in politics for the last 4 years. He is not someone who plays face, he is not someone who adopts a persona, he is not someone who pretends to be someone else when he is in front of a camera or on a stage with a microphone in his hand. The way he handles himself when people are either telling him what's good or telling him what's bad. When people are standing up and yelling at him, or when people are inviting him to join him at the seat at the table. He's a person who truly cares deeply about people, about community, about family. And just like me, when I was back home in Michigan wondering why politics is so hard, why does life have to be so hard for people? I found something in Peter, a politician who wants to answer that question and wants to make life easier for people. Because when we get down to it, all politics is personal for someone. For all of us, politics affects our lives in some way. And watching Peter as mayor in South Bend has been miraculous. The way that he has brought a city out of the ashes, a city that was left for dead, called one of America's dying cities, and now it is booming, it is coming back, it believes in itself again. And now out on the trail, watching my husband, a candidate for president, a top-tier candidate for president, might I say, travel this country and talk about a politics that can get people believing in this country again. Because are you not ready to believe in this country again? I believe in this country. I am hopeful. I am hopeful for a day when Peter can stand in front of this nation and say, the state of our union is strong, and mean it. So, I'm really excited for you to get to meet him a little bit more tonight, to have an opportunity to chat with him. I want to thank you so much, again, for this warm welcome to Provincetown. Thank you so much for welcoming us. It's been a marvel spending time with you, so please help me welcome my husband, Pete Buttigieg.
Oh, wow. Hello, Provincetown. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, my goodness. Thank you. Thank you. Wow, what a reception. It really does feel like Provincetown. Did I marry well or what? Chasten and I are having such a great time. We're so thankful for the incredibly warm welcome that we've gotten from all of you. Walking up the street today, it felt like our own little parade. People coming to say hi, to share their own stories, to let us know how we fit into their story. People from really close, people from across the country. And it reminded me of what it is to be in a place that celebrates inclusion, that celebrates belonging. And we have an opportunity to make America a place that celebrates inclusion and celebrates belonging, and we better do it before it's too late. Speaking of inclusion and belonging, a big thank you again to the campers and everybody behind Camp Lightbulb. Such an amazing organization, and really enjoyed being with you. We have an opportunity to make history right now. And part of what it requires is for us to understand the historic nature of the moment we're living in. You know, when you read about all of the moments that were really turning points in history, the moments that decided what the next years or decades or even centuries of history would be like, one thing they have in common is they're usually not moments that seem like they would have been very easy to live in. There were moments of chaos, of change, of disruption, of anguish. And I think that we can read around us the fact that there is so much of those things, those forces, so much anxiety. And it signals to us that we are living in a moment of enormous consequence. So much so that I think even now, believe it or not, we are probably underreacting to the seriousness of the moment that we live in. And I'm not even just talking about this presidency, although Lord knows that's a serious issue that's got us all very worried. But I want us to think about the conditions that make a presidency like that even possible. Because people like the president we've got now don't just come along all the time. And we know that part of how we got here was nefarious activity and cheating, but the reality is a president like this doesn't get within cheating distance of winning. Unless there is something deeply wrong in our country, some deep churn, some deep change going on. And it's happening in our economy, and it's happening in our politics. And what it all adds up to is that it will fall to us, all of us who were alive and making decisions in this moment in American history, to decide what the rest of our lifetimes will look like, to decide in the next 3 or 4 years what the next 30 or 40 are going to hold. We are lucky and unlucky enough to be living in one of those moments. And when you're in one of those moments, it's not enough to look at the political ups and downs. It's not enough to look at technical details. We have to look at our deepest values. And those will guide us when we're making the complicated choices that are ahead of us. Values have a way of making complicated choices a little simpler. And for some reason in my lifetime, the very word values has come to be associated with the political right. But I think it's safe to say that if not before, then certainly in these times, they have lost any claim to use words like values. So now's our chance to reclaim some of those values that are not in fact conservative, but are American, beginning with freedom. And what a fitting place, this town hall, for us to talk about freedom. And to recognize that there's a lot more to freedom than cutting taxes or cutting regulations. A lot of the people who first showed up here were dealing with the need to have freedom from others dictating to you what your life ought to be like based on their interpretation of their religions. Does that sound familiar to anybody here? It's a challenge that maybe rings true in our time. That's freedom too. Healthcare is freedom in our time, because you're not free if you can't live a life if you're choosing, if you can't go start that small business that you've been wanting to start, because you can't leave your old job, because that would mean losing your healthcare. Healthcare is freedom. By the way, at a time like this, if we want to talk about freedom, left and right, let's talk about women's reproductive freedom and how important it is that we all be standing up for it. Freedom for all of us means that all of us must be free. None of us are going to be able to say that we live freely if any of us are suffering. If people, whether they are citizens or not, are suffering in inhuman conditions at the border as punishment for nothing more than trying to save their children's lives, none of us are free. It diminishes our freedom too. You don't have to be a person of color to recognize that when people of color are treated differently by our criminal justice system, then none of us are truly free. And until we live in a time when nothing about the outcomes in your life, from your life expectancy to your likelihood to have a problem with the criminal justice system to your earnings over your lifetime, can be predicted based on your race. Until we change that, none of us are free. But we have a chance to change that in our lifetime, and we had better. We had better, because this is one of those hinge points in American history. So we're going to talk about freedom in a whole new way. By the way, one other thing about freedom, education is one of the great sources of freedom. When you have access to education, you can free your mind and chart your course, which is why I believe the next president needs to start by appointing a Secretary of Education who believes in public education. We know a thing or two about freedom. And we got some things to say about security, too. Another one of those words that got taken over as if it was property of the Republican Party. Do we have any veterans in the House? Thank you for serving. Everybody in the House for serving America. You know, for all of us who had that experience, different though they may be, all of our experiences involved saluting a flag and wearing a flag on our shoulder that was not a Republican flag, it was an American flag. And it was a flag whose symbolism included the idea that we all put our lives on the line to live in a country where anybody can express their political dissent, including criticizing their president, and not be questioned as to their loyalty for the republic for which it stands. But America needs leaders who understand security in a richer sense than the kind of security that you can go after by promising to put up a wall from coast to coast. That's not real security. Not in a time when cybersecurity threats are at our gates, when election security is a major 21st century problem. If we really want to be serious about security in our time, we've got to talk about security in the face of violent white nationalism that has claimed more lives in our recent years than Islamist terrorism. And we are going to finally make sure that America realizes that climate disruption is nothing less than a national security emergency in our time. Freedom and security are not property of one party. Certainly not the party in charge right now. And by the way, God does not belong to a political party. In keeping with the principles of the people who arrived here 399 years ago, I believe it is imperative that any president or presidential candidate speak up for people of any religion and no religion equally. Yes. But I also want the word to go out to people whose choices in politics are guided by religious principles, that they've got a choice. And that at a moment like this, if you are guided by religious principles that include the idea that we are to feed the hungry and welcome the stranger and look after those who are most vulnerable and do it with decency and humility, you've got a choice. Now, for any of these American values where, by the way, most Americans agree with us, not necessarily most American members of Congress, but most American people agree with us, we've got to tune up our democracy, quick, because our democracy's gotten out of whack. We got districts drawn to where we have voters being chosen by their politicians. It's perfectly backwards. And I've signed up for the radical concept that in the world's greatest democracy, it might be fitting to make sure that a vote from Indiana and a vote from Massachusetts and a vote from California and a vote from Texas all count the same by just giving the presidency to the person who gets the most votes. Seems reasonable to me. Now, I've been thinking a lot about what it's going to take to actually make sure we win this election. Because I think a lot of us, especially if we're from parts of the country a little bit different from where we're gathered today, know that it's not impossible for this president to win again. And I'll tell you what it looks like. I'll tell you exactly how it happens. It happens if, first of all, we're divided. Remember, 23 or so candidates are going to not be the nominee, and those 23 need to rally around the one who is and quit and be united and getting this done. So that's part of how that happens. The other part of how that happens is if we look like we're the establishment, if we look like we're just saying back to normal, right? They're saying back to the 50s, which was not great for a lot of us. But sometimes we sound like our party's saying back to the 90s, and that's not going to work either. Where I come from in the industrial Midwest, you start the clock the day I was born, most people's wages haven't budged one bit. And people are angry with Democrats and Republicans over that fact. Now, the current folks in power are just making it worse, but that's part of how they got power. They stoked anger around that and found fertile ground for things like misogyny and racism and xenophobia. And they found that fertile ground in that kind of sense that everything's broken, that the system doesn't work, and I might as well go use my precious vote to just vote to burn the house down. Vote for a guy I don't even like just to burn the house down. We need to take care of the causes of which that is a symptom. And that's why we need something completely different. Now, this is where I come in. So, much more opposite of this president than a laid-back, intellectual, gay Midwestern mayor still in his 30s. And I think people are ready for the opposite of what they got right now. Now, the last thing that's absolutely essential if we're going to win is to draw people into the process, to engage everybody, and make sure people feel that their vote matters. And I'm preaching, I imagine, to the choir here. You wouldn't be here if you didn't care. But we know a lot of people in our lives who question whether it's worth going out to vote. And the reality is, hearing from somebody like me is not nearly as effective as hearing from somebody they know, hearing from somebody like you. That is the biggest predictor of whether somebody's actually going to go vote, is whether somebody they know and respect asked them to. So our campaign organizing model will be based on that fact. But I'm counting on you to spread that sense of hope. And that's the other thing I want to talk about. And then I'll stop the monologue and we can talk for a little bit about whatever you think is interesting. But I want to talk about hope because hope may have fallen out of fashion a little bit. And not without reason, because we're living in such a dark time. We see our alliances being torn apart. We see our sense of a common touchstone in America being threatened. But running for office is an act of hope. Helping somebody run for office is an act of hope. Sitting in a crowded room that's very warm, fanning yourself, watching somebody speak to you who's running for office is an act of hope. And so is voting, and so is volunteering, and so I need you to spread that sense of hope that's alive and well in this room and take it out to everybody else. Can I count on you to do that? Well, part of how we can do that is by sharing our stories. Every one of us has stories of frustration and of hope. And that's especially true in our community. As somebody who could not have served in the military at the beginning of this decade and been out, and is now standing before you as an out veteran running for president, introduced by his husband, we have a lot of grounds for hope. Doesn't mean we've solved our problems, but that's exactly why we're here. Because we know how much work is yet to be done, and we have a sense of urgency about doing it. That's why I'm doing this. That's why I need your help to do this. And I know that we can get this done and change the channel in American society before it's too late. So that's what I'm up to. That's why I'm here. That's what I'm hoping you'll take away. And I think we got some questions here. So, Brian, are you come back out and help us with some questions? All right, welcome back to the stage, Brian Rockmanelli.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone, for filling out the questions. But we're going to start out with this one, number one, from Camp Light Bulb. Thank you so much. So, Pete, what is your message to youth, minority, LGBTQ?
All right. So, the message that you will often hear, and it's not a bad one, but the message you'll hear is, you're the future. And it's true. The future is diverse. The future will be run by you. And we're thinking a lot about your future, and my campaign is based on the idea that we ought to have a good future. But my message to you is that you're the present. There has never been more urgency for young people, especially minority and LGBTQ youth, and minority LGBTQ youth, and the list goes on, to raise your voices. Because you have something that no one else can do. And it's the ability to bring some of these issues to life. I'll tell you, when I'm out campaigning and somebody who's not even old enough to vote looks me in the eye and says, what are you going to do about climate change? Or what are you going to do about bullying? Or what are you going to do about gun violence? Or what are you going to do about the way that homelessness disproportionately affects LGBTQ youth? Or what are you going to do about racial justice for someone like me? When somebody asks that question, there is a moral urgency to it that demonstrates that it's not theory, that it's someone's life. And never underestimate the power that can have in our political process. Never underestimate it. I have seen in our city, I've seen our legislative body change its mind on a vote. And by the way, one of the biggest times that happened was when, back in 2012 or 2013, the city was considering a non-discrimination ordinance. And they tried several times over the years and it never got through. But the number of students who stood up and shared their stories and implored the council to do the right thing, I think was what made the difference. The March for Our Lives is young people demanding people old enough to make political decisions take better care of it. So my message to you is that you have more power than you think if you stay engaged. And the other message to you is that you're not alone. Part of the amazing thing about this camp is that you are learning in a very vivid way that you're not alone. And think about all the people out there who maybe haven't had that chance to realize, to see, to sense that they're not alone. You can reach out and change that too. So the biggest thing I want you to know is how much power is in your hands. And I will be here to do everything I can as a candidate and as a president to empower you and make sure that your voice is heard.
Okay. What is your plan for dealing with the environmental crisis?
All right. So, as I said, I view this as a national security matter. And part of what we got to do is we got to make sure people realize this is here and now. Too often, it still looks on television like it's something that's happening only to penguins and polar bears, like it's a far-off problem. But it's here. It's here in Provincetown. It's in California where you have wildfires like we haven't seen in ages. It's in the increased frequency and severity of storms. It's in South Bend. I had to activate our emergency operations center to deal with a flood that they told me could only happen once every 1,000 years. And the next year, I had to do it again. So either I got some crazy statistical luck, or things are changing. We were just in Iowa yesterday, farmers unable to cultivate their own fields because of what's happening. That's happening year after year. So we know this is upon us, and we know we've got to act. And we know what to do. We may not have every scientific detail figured out, but we know the biggest things we've got to do. We know we've got to price carbon so that you actually see the true cost of the things that you do in this economy. By the way, that's not taking money out of the economy, because we could rebate it out to people in a progressive way, and most people would be made more than better off than before. So don't let anybody tell you this is taxing people to death. Most people could be made more than whole. That's one thing we got to do. Another thing we got to do is add research, probably at least quadruple the current federal levels of research. And that goes to renewable energy, but it also goes to energy storage and carbon storage. Speaking of carbon storage, here's something you don't hear about a lot. Through soil management, it is possible to take as much, it is at least scientifically possible. We haven't figured out how to do it yet, but it's scientifically possible, theoretically possible, that you could capture as much carbon in the soil as the amount that gets put into the air every year by the entire transportation sector of the world, if we did the research to figure out how. And the reason this is important is that rural America needs to hear that they are part of the solution and needs to be challenged to be part of that. They can't feel like this is something that's being done against them or to them. We got to recruit every part of this country to be part of the solution. Rural America, students, academia, the business world. America needs a national project. We always do better when we've got a national project. Cold War, space race, fighting World War II. And for once, we've got a national project at our feet that doesn't just involve fighting other people. Let's use that as a way to rally the best capacities and energies of this nation and summon them to do something about this major topic.
Okay. So Jeff asks, how is your mom?
Oh, thanks. Are you here, Jeff? Oh, there you go. Hi. Thanks for the question, Jeff. Mom's great. Thanks for asking. It's been a challenging year in our family. She had some heart issues. It turns out that a lifelong diet of mostly red meat can, in fact, catch up to you, and it did in her case, although she insists that she's done everything right. And so it left her in the hospital for heart surgery, right at the time that my dad was going through chemo. And it was a really tough time for our family. Although it was also a time that reminded me why politics matters, because as we were navigating this huge, challenging time for us, we only had to think about what was medically right for them. We didn't have to worry about being bankrupt because of Medicare. Because some people sat in one of those white buildings in Washington and decided generations ago that when you reach a certain age, you shouldn't be sent into bankruptcy by these healthcare issues. Now, there are problems with Medicare still, but the fundamental freedom that came with that is something that I want every American to have, and it's why I believe in universal health care. So Dad didn't make it, but Mom got better. You would never know. She goes to the gym, she's pumping iron, doing all the things the doctors are telling her to do. She's on the trail with us sometimes. She came to Miami. Did y'all hear there was a debate last week? Is that, yeah? She was there at the debate and had a great time. So thanks for asking, and I'll bring her your greetings. She'll be glad to hear you ask about it.
Okay, Damien from Provincetown. Provincetown is a place for everyone. How will you stop America from becoming more divided and become more like Provincetown?
Oh, all right. Damien, you here? Where are you? Thank you. So I think, first of all, I love the premise of your question, and I agree with it. I feel like Provincetown models that sense of what America could be like. I can't tell you how welcome we were made to feel. The biggest thing on my mind, well, there's a couple things. So one, you set me up nicely to talk about one of my favorite subjects, which is national service. So I think part of how we do this is to create more experiences that people have in common. When I was in Afghanistan, in the military, every time we left the wire in my vehicle, somebody got into my vehicle and was trusting me with their life, and I was trusting my life to them. And I promise you, we did not have similar worldviews or politics or racial backgrounds or regional backgrounds. We were different generations sometimes. We trusted each other because we had to. And I want everyone to have that experience of bonding through a challenging mission without everyone having the experience of going to war. And part of how you do that is expanding opportunities for national service. I believe by the time we celebrate our country's 250th in 2026, we can have 1 million opportunities for people graduating high school to do national service for a full year, get benefits for doing it, and gain that kind of touchstone of national identity. But the other thing I think that we really need to do in order to come together as a country is to recognize our interdependence. So we just had Independence Day. We're celebrating our independence. But we also need to recognize our interdependence, that we rely on each other and we have to stand up for each other. That's why I think a man running for president, it's twice as important for a man to be outspoken about things like a woman's right to choose and women's equality and gender pay gaps. You know, it's why, for those of us whose marriages depend on the grace of a single vote in the U.S. Supreme Court, we're relying not only on the activism, as Chasten said, of trans women of color and people in a gay movement for years, everybody across the LGBTQIA plus spectrum, but also a lot of straight people who were part of that alliance that we're looking at. It's why I welcome my obligation as a candidate not of color to be speaking about racial equality in this country. It is imperative. Frankly, this is a conversation that white America needs to have with itself more than anything in order for it to get better. So it's that awareness that it turns out it's not at all true that a rising tide lifts all boats automatically. We've learned that's not true over the course of my lifetime. But what is true is, as I think Paul Wellstone said, we all do better when we all do better. That each of us depends on lifting up the other. And if we get that right, if we recognize that, if we build a campaign, by the way, that models that, as we are seeking to do and can do with your help, then I think we have a chance to bring together an America that is dangerously divided before it's too late. Thank you.
Okay. As a gay Seventh-day evangelist, I grew up believing you can't be gay and Christian. How can we break down these barriers nationally?
Great question. The question, leave a name or not?
No name.
Okay, otherwise I'd greet you. Oh, there you are. Hi, thanks for your question. So, first of all, people need to hear from people like you, right, who have that crossover experience. And I'm trying to give voice to that experience too. It's hard. We know that there are so many challenges for religious communities to recognize and see the humanity and then support those of us in the LGBTQ community. And the way I think about it is there's a couple things that I try to get across. The first is that as somebody who is religious, I am part of creation. And my love is part of creation. Who you are is part of creation. And so, as I said to the vice president, I don't think he understood, but I tried to get him to understand, is that if you got a problem with how I was made, you've got a problem with my maker. Take it up with him or her. The other thing is, you know, in my faith tradition, there's a lot about the idea of witness. It's a word you hear a lot. Well, bearing witness to one another's experience is a way to do that too. People deep down are called to be kind to one another. And if we let people know that their former interpretation of their religion is calling on them to be unkind, it is amazing what people can do. Not always, and I know a lot of people here have unbelievably painful experiences of not being able to get somebody over that bridge. And it's a journey that we're all on together. But when we talk about it in terms of love, in terms of lifting one another up, in terms of dignity, and for me at least, in terms of the fact that belonging to a religion that calls on us to put ourselves a little further down on the list, the experience of love, the experience of my marriage to Chasten has very much moved me closer to God, because it's given me the experience of caring about someone more than myself. So I think all we can do is testify to our own experiences and hope that others will see the light. But it's not an easy thing. It is a thing where I think we're gathering more and more energy, and people are questioning some of their old assumptions, and we got to keep those fires lit. Thank you for raising.
Okay, Teresa from Rhode Island. I'm a little Rhode Islander. Will you support finding the 9/11 Victims Compensation Fund?
Yes. Teresa here? Thank you, Teresa. Yes, we got to do a better job across the board of supporting first responders. When you're a mayor, you think a lot about the well-being of first responders because you're responsible for them and for their well-being and for their choices. And when you look at what first responders did on 9/11, running into the fire, how can America not have their back? And it's another example of how our democracy must be broken, because in no functioning democracy would Washington fail to deliver, as it has. So I will absolutely support that. And more broadly, recognize that we've got to support first responders not only when their physical health is endangered. Look at firefighters' increased rates of cancer because of what they're exposed to. We've got to actually programmatically deal with that. Police officers, who there's a lot of emphasis on their well-being from the neck down, on physical fitness, not nearly enough on their mental health needs, with everything that they're exposed to. And we need to be there for them too. So we've got a lot of work to do.
Okay, Pete, this has got to be our last one.
Oh.
How could you help to manage student debt?
Ooh. All right. So this is a big one. This is a big one in our household because we got six-figure student debt. Turns out when you choose to become a teacher, society does not reward that quite the way you think it would, given how important that profession is. So there's several things we got to do. First of all, for those of us who already have debt, we've got to make it possible to refinance it. If you can refinance your house, you ought to be able to refinance your student debt. Seems common sense to me. We've also got to recognize that there have been some bad actors out there. I'm talking about so-called colleges that the Obama administration started finally cracking down on, these for-profit organizations that do not set people up for success. And this administration got rid of all the rules again. But I believe debt from those colleges should be erased because they turned the Department of Education into a predatory lender, and it's not right. Now, I also believe we ought to make it more affordable to go to college in the first place. We can absolutely, there's a lot of fretting over how we can pay for these things, but if we make it a priority, we can absolutely afford to make college debt-free for low and middle income students. We can double Pell Grants, we can make it possible to use Pell for living expenses, not just tuition, and we can work with states to require that they lift up a greater share of cost than what they are right now, passing so much of it on to students. So we can make college more affordable, and then there's one more thing we gotta do. In addition to making it more affordable to go to college, we got to make it more affordable to not go to college. And what I mean by that is, of course, we want to support anybody who seeks to go to college for whom cost is a barrier. But we can't go on with this idea that the only way to prosperity in America is if you went to college. It should absolutely be possible to live well, to afford to support your family, to be able to afford to be generous in your community with the earnings that you get from your job, whether you went to college or not. And it's one of the reasons why we need to raise wages across the board and strengthen organized labor. I guess our time's about up, so...
Chasten, you're going to come back out?
Yeah, come on out. Curtain call. Yeah, this guy. One more time for Chasten. So the biggest thing I want to leave you with is that you are this campaign, if you'd like to be. This campaign, you know, I'm the face of it. I'm out there doing what I'm doing, and you'll see it on television, and you'll see it in your town halls. There's a staff, a phenomenally talented staff, and volunteers who did things like help bring this event together. And we are very thankful for them. The campaign is you. We had this huge bit of news. I'm not above being proud of the fact that we had some fantastic news to share on our fundraising, but the number I'm proudest of, actually, even more than the fact that we're leading the field in what we've been able to put together, which we can then use to have organizers on the ground knocking on doors and mobilizing volunteers. But the thing I'm even prouder of than that is the number of people who supported us. We're 400,000 people who at various levels decided to be part of this movement. And that's just the beginning. By spreading the word in person, over the phone, knocking on doors, and even online, you are building this campaign. You are fashioning this campaign. You are modeling those values of inclusion and passion and support for the future that all of us think is so important. And you're doing it in a way that shows rather than tells how we can do something completely different than what this president's put up. And that's what I'm relying on you to do. So if you're moved by the message today, can I look to you to build this campaign? Are you ready to do it all the way through the primaries and to the general election? Will you promise to find joy in that process and lift one another up as we go? I'm pretty sure we can't lose. Thank you so much for your support. Thank you for being part of this. Thank you for believing in us. And I will see you on the trail all the way to the White House. Thank you.